Sunday, February 9th, 2020. The 92nd Academy Awards. It's the Oscars and certainly one for the history books. After an eventful ceremony, it's time for the grand finale, Best Picture, and a stacked lineup. A Scorsese, a Tarantino, an immersive war film, a period piece Little Women adaptation, a streaming service heavy hitter, a dramatic interpretation of the Joker, an entertaining and charming World War II satire, and finally, Parasite, the underdog of the show. A Korean thriller with a witty and divisive commentary on class divisions. The film had already won 3 of the 6 Academy Awards it was nominated for, including Best Original Screenplay, Best International Feature Film, and Best Director, making for an exceedingly exciting night for Parasite's mastermind, Bong Joon-ho, a man who has already seen some amount of notoriety for his films in the past, with his 2003 cult classic, Memories of Murder, his 2013 film, Snowpiercer. Even still, Parasite has become something much larger. Parasite's success may be attributed to many things, but what I would most like to look at is the symbolism of Parasite and how it is used so effectively. But first, a very brief summary of Parasite and a quick spoiler warning. I will be addressing some of the plot points in the later parts of the film, and while I am avoiding some major spoilers, I would highly recommend that you watch the film as it is truly a masterpiece and in my opinion best experienced on its own. It's on Netflix now, so yeah, go check it out. I'm sure you'll like it. If you haven't watched the film, but wish to continue, here's a short summary. Parasite follows 2 families, the Kim family, living in a semi-basement apartment in Seoul, South Korea, and the Park family, living in a mansion on a hill overlooking Seoul. Following a job recommendation from a friend, the Kim's family's son, Ki-woo, forges a resume and diploma, and gets a job tutoring the Park's family's daughter. Through an elaborate scheme, the Kim family manages to take up jobs with the family, and in addition to the tutor as an art teacher, as well as jobs replacing Mr. Park's driver and the family's longtime housekeeper. In a complicated turn of events, everything crashes down on the family, as the film explores themes of radical class division as a result of late capitalism, what it means to be a parasite, and what I would like to focus on, the struggle for prosperity and what people might do to achieve a higher standard of living. Parasite focuses on many themes, but perhaps the most notable is the symbolism of a susuk rock that Ki-woo is gifted at the beginning of the film by his friend Min. In Korean culture, susuk, also known as viewing stones or scholar stones, as the rock is referred to in Parasite, are a symbol of wealth and power, and historically were often found on the desks of rich businessmen as the symbol of their opulence and prosperity. This stems from the gongshi art of China that spread to Korea. In Chinese culture, many kinds of rocks and stones would also be displayed in the gardens and studies of scholars. Oftentimes, the more unique the stone would be, the more desirable it would be for display. The many different patterns and complex variations formed by erosion would also be recreated by sculpting larger rocks. The fascination of unique stones can also be seen in Japan's Suski stones. Suski stones often tend to be processed in some way, namely with sculpting and varnishes to expose surfaces of that rock that would not normally occur in nature. Unlike the traditional Chinese gongshi stones and the Japanese suski, the traditions of the susuk scholar stones of Korea were often seen as more desirable if they were untouched and completely naturally formed by erosion and other natural processes. Susuk became a symbol of status in Korea in the Joseon dynasty from 1392 to 1897, but had a cultural resurgence in the 1980s as a part of Korea's economic boom, but since then have become less common once again. The resurgence of the 80s mostly appealed to self-made businessmen like Parasite's Mr. Park. This also explains why Mr. Kim, who had possibly grown up with wealth, immediately recognizes Min's gift as a scholar rock. When Min gives the gift to the family, he says that the stone will bring material wealth to them, foreshadowing the jobs that the family takes up for the Park family later in the film. Now understanding some of the cultural significance behind the scholar rock in Parasite, I would like to explore how it connects to the overarching theme that I had mentioned earlier. I believe that the rock that Ki-woo becomes attached to in the film fits a perfect metaphor for his attachment to the ideals of prosperity, and how this later becomes his undoing. So let's go back to the start when the family is first given the rock by Min, who arrives at their apartment with a visibly heavy wooden box. After scaring off a drunken man urinating in the alleyway outside of their apartment, he comes in with the gift explaining that it's for the family. Curiously, the family watches Min open the box, revealing the rock. Immediately, Ki-woo is entranced by the gift. Later that night, Min tells him about the job. Later in the film, after the family has managed to all get jobs with the Park family, they are on what all they've gotten through and how they've all gotten the jobs, and just how much money the Park family is funneling into the Kim family without them knowing it. During this time, another man begins drunkenly urinating outside their window. Ki-woo jumps up to go outside and scare him off, briefly picking up the rock to throw at him. But the last minute, he's given a bottle of water to spray at the man instead. Following the analogy of the rock representing prosperity in this scene, Ki-woo very nearly uses his newfound prosperity to hurt another person living in similar conditions to him. This illustrates how the mere promise of wealth has already changed Ki-woo, and that it will likely continue to do so. While this scene is quite short and mostly played for humor, had Ki-woo used the rock rather than the water, the scene may have played out very differently. The next time we see the rock in the film is a little bit less subtle. This comes as the family returns to their apartment during a torrential rainstorm to find their home completely flooded with sewer water. As they frantically gather what they can, Ki-woo stands in the murky water for a second of the rock, and sees the rock rise into his hands floating in the water. This is where we first encounter an instance of the story creating room for multiple interpretations for the audience. In this scene, assuming that the rock is physically floated in the water would mean that the rock is possibly hollow or not as it seems. This creates an interesting implication for the metaphorical rock, as it can mean that this symbol of prosperity that Ki-woo has become attached to, it may be simply an illusion, or that we can look at this with Korean culture and say that if the rock is hollow, it has less value as it has been altered from its natural form, or is indeed just a fake. Or perhaps we look at it from a new perspective, the perspective of the filmmaker Bong Joon-ho, that as he had originally planned for the rock, in an interview he said that he hadn't originally planned for the rock to float, but when they were on set, he decided that it was more visually interesting for the scene, and as such, might not mean anything at all. For the rest of the film, Ki-woo brings the stone with him everywhere. When asked about it in a scene where the Kim family is taking refuge sleeping in a public gym for those displaced by the flood, he tells his father that, quote, "It keeps clinging to me." This shows that as he has lost all else, he still clings to the promise of prosperity. This scene also shows some amount of irony, as Ki-woo has nothing but the rock. A symbol of status and excess wealth, yet he's sleeping in a gym with his house flooded and no plan to get back on his feet. The next moment involving the rock that I would like to look at shows the fall of Ki-woo both metaphorically and literally. Near the end of the film, the family is in a situation where a man has practically lost his mind in a vengeful rage against the Kim family. Ki-woo feels as though he should check in on the man, who's down a flight of stairs, to see if he's still there. As he's trying to sneak down the stairs, the rock slips out of his hands and falls down. This shows that Ki-woo is literally losing his grip on the rock, also might mean metaphorically he's losing his grip on his ideals of prosperity, and in understanding this, he is at a point of no return. In a frantic scene that follows, Ki-woo is left in a position that comes as a dramatic conclusion to his story. Ki-woo is caught with a man standing over him with the rock, then suddenly, crunch. Ki-woo's ambition and obsession comes to this. His attachment to the rock and all that it represents ends up destroying him. Had he let go of the rock and his unrelenting attachment in the search of prosperity earlier, he wouldn't have gotten to this scenario. Or perhaps this is what happens when anybody holds on to the ideals of prosperity and the accumulation of wealth. Perhaps the idolization of wealth was what got him to this point. Or perhaps Ki-woo in this situation got here because he didn't hold on to these ideals tight enough. Perhaps he was just able to hold on to it a little bit longer, he could have made it out safe. Earlier in the film, he tells the man urinating outside their apartment to get a grip, and had he gotten a grip on himself in this situation, he could have made it out. Perhaps he just got a grip, and he had stopped the man from getting up the stairs, he could have been the hero. Well, this is an interesting idea to consider. I honestly don't think that this would be very realistic. Perhaps the rock floating in the water earlier was simply a visualization of the uncertainty that Ki-woo experiences toward this idol, and that he knows that it isn't worth continuing to hold on to the rock and what it represents. In the gym the night before Ki-taek, his father explained that he has never had a plan because, quote, "with no plan, nothing can go wrong." And on that note, let's skip ahead to the last time we see the Scholar's Stone. At the end of the film, Ki-woo wakes up in a hospital bed. After being told what had happened after he was nearly killed by the rock, he comes up with a plan to rebuild his family. A significant part of the plan is to get a large enough amount of money to buy the now abandoned Park House, as his father has been hiding in the house since the event involving Ki-woo's coma. As a part of a montage explaining his plan, there's a brief shot of a pair of hands placing the rock in a peaceful river stream. This is the last time we see the rock, and while it is already an interesting scene, the context is far more interesting. Here are the two ways that I think we can look at it. In the final version of the film, we see the hands putting the rock into the river. This could possibly mean that Ki-woo has set aside his idolization of prosperity in order to stick to his plan and get enough money to buy the house and free his father. While this may be the obvious meaning of this short scene, there is one other interpretation. This interpretation is seen in the original storyboards of the film. Thankfully, I've got that right here. Alright, scene 157, stream, unknown mountain stream, the moment when the Scholar Rock was first discovered. From a beautiful stream, a pair of hands pick up the pristine rock. This shows that the original plan of the scene was originally supposed to be the first discovery of the stone, but the final shot plays this in reverse. If we were to look at the scene in this way, how does that change the meaning? Personally, I would interpret this as showing where the stone first came from, as to show that Ki-woo, even without having the rock physically, continues to hold on to what it represents. It continues clinging to him. This goes with his making of a plan, having not listened to his father's recommendation, so the rock being first taken from the river may be a visualization that as he tries to reassure himself of the promise of prosperity, and that it still may be true. This goes to show the cyclical nature of his obsession with the rock, and when he's put back into the place of having nothing, all he can think about is the possibility of becoming rich to solve his problems. This could be attributed to the film as a whole, or even the world, as that in capitalism we're all stuck in the cycle of dreaming of prosperity but ending up in the same place we started at most of the time. To paraphrase the French philosopher Camus, one must imagine Ki-woo was happy. I believe that the elaborate symbolism and metaphors of Parasite make up a fair amount of what makes Parasite what it is, nearly perfect. In addition to the groundbreaking Best Picture win, the beautiful cinematography, essentially flawless storyboarding and editing of the masterful script, Parasite's use of imagery and long metaphors make it for a film that I keep coming back to and that I anticipate continuing to coming back to. Thank you for watching. Please go watch Parasite if you haven't already, or if you have, I'm sure that you'll find something new this time. Again, thank you for watching, have a good morning, and if I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.